All right, so welcome to everyone who's decided to come to our little panel session about romance and women's fiction. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Judy L Mohr, and I'm the municipal liaison for the Christchurch writers for the Christchurch, New Zealand region, and I'm also the municipal liaison for New Zealand elsewhere as well. However, I'm not a romance writer, but I know some absolutely talented romance writers in the region. So I am so glad to have three of them with me today. Just as a quick housekeeping before I introduce our guests, if you are not on the panel, we do request that you have your cameras off and your microphones muted, because it's going to help with our recording, because we are recording this and we're going to put it on YouTube somewhere. We haven't decided exactly where, but it will go up on YouTube so everyone can see it, and these lovely three talented women that are with us today will be able to advertise their books. Yes, let's do this. All right, so we have with us, we have Alexa Rivers, wave hi, and we have Amy Blythe, and we have Stephanie Ruth. So I'm going to do a quick, why don't we get them to introduce themselves and mention what genre, subgenre of romance or women's fiction that they're writing, and we'll go from there. Alexa, why don't we start with you?
Hello, yes, I write small town contemporary romance on the steamier side, and I've just going into sports romance. I've got my first one of those coming out in December with a couple more planned in the same series. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Cool. Amy, what about you?
Hi, I write romantic comedy, so I guess chick lit, if you like that term. And they're quite they're all open door. They're quite sexy. And my latest one is a retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion, and it is told with two women, so it's a gay relationship. And have some Regency books waiting in the wings, but I haven't put in them yet. They're not out yet. Yeah.
All right, and Steph, what about you?
Kia ora. I'm writing contemporary romance and set in New Zealand, and though they're quite steamy too, I'm also doing some short stories, which have been really fun, and I tend to link all of my stories, so there's 1 degree of separation or 2 degrees of separation, as like New Zealand is. I'm also writing a dystopian at the moment, but that's like a it's a bit of a relief time. So if I'm having trouble or a sticky point, then I will skip back to my dystopian. It's a wee bit like watching Star Wars when you're supposed to be cooking dinner or something like that.
Cool. So I noticed that there was this wide range of talking about the sweet, and then, you know, we were talking about the contemporary, and then Regency. And I've learned what these terms mean over the years because of working with you guys. You're so awesome. But I know there are a few who would be seeing this and would go, what is Regency? What does it mean to be writing a contemporary? What does it mean to be writing sweet romance? So how about somebody pipes in and tells me what that all means? Alexa, what is sweet?
Sweet is, I think there are different levels depending on what you're after. There's sweet, and then there's clean and wholesome, which is no swearing, no intimacy. There might be a couple of kisses. Sweet, I think, can be, you know, sex scenes happen, but it's off the page. Steamy is a bit more open door, like Amy said before. And then you've got your more hot erotica type level. And as far as my small towns go, their romance is set in New Zealand in small communities. So it's one of those story settings where everyone knows everyone, kind of like with Steph's, and everyone's interrelated, and all of the stories kind of revisit in with the same characters. And then my sports romances are set in Las Vegas in an MMA gym. So they're with professional MMA fighter heroes and all sorts of different women.
Okay, so sweet is basically saying that if there is any sex scenes, it's closed door, it's off screen, and it's a little bit more cleaner than, say, gritty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like within sexy, there's quite a range. There's the sexy where you see the sex, but there's a lot of euphemisms used. And then there's the more explicit sexy, but it's still a romance because the relationship, the emotional arc is kind of the focus of the narrative as a whole. And sex is part of the relationship, and so it's still part of that, but the story isn't. Yeah, whereas erotica is actually almost not a romance genre. Like it's often like there's often, a mix of those together, but erotica isn't necessarily it doesn't have to have a romance in it at all. Yeah.
Yeah, the sexual relationship is more the kind of the purpose of the story in erotica.
I've been asked that a few times, are you writing erotica? And it's the same point that some of my stories are erotic or they get erotic, but it's about the character arcs and how they come together. So I believe in happy ever afters or happy for nows, and that's a readership promise. So my readers will know that every story that they read of mine, there will never be a cliffhanger or somebody leaving somebody at the end or cheating on page. None of that. There might be cheating in the past, but yeah, it's about the couple coming together, no matter who those protagonists are, how they come together and how they travel forward in their story. So yes, some of it's erotic and some of it's very sweet, but yeah, there's also within sweet, I know that there's the Christian genre as well, but which I don't write myself, but I know that that's often considered sweet, although in some Christian romance there will be closed door sex, which is or intimacy behind closed doors, or that it happens off page. Yeah, but usually after marriage in that sense.
Okay, so what about Regency? Amy, you talked about Regency. What defines Regency romance?
Well, it's one historical period, right? And technically, it was a very small period where the Prince Regent was king, because I think his uncle was king and was nuts, and so they had to have someone else step in. It was actually a very short period, but the Regency genre tends to cover a slightly longer period, which usually includes the Georgian period. So it's kind of late 1700s, early 1800s. And someone's going to tell me I'm wrong because that's probably not actually very accurate, but you can Google it. I guess the writer who kind of made Regency really popular was probably Georgette Hare. So her novels are set in that period. And the other writer who we all probably know who writes about that or wrote about that period is Jane Austen, who actually lived then. So it was contemporary for her, whereas Georgette Hare wrote much more recently, actually. Yeah, does that answer that? I mean, there's lots of other popular historical periods, probably none that have, like there's Victorian, and there's like sort of 1920s, and there's a steampunk, like there are other historical periods where romance has got like quite a big following, but I think Regency it's just always popular. It's like other ones kind of come in and out of popularity. Middle Ages, like sort of that older England, like in the Dark Ages, that period, that's sometimes popular, but Regency is just a stalwart. Like, how do you say that word? Stalwart? That word. It's just always, it baffles publishers. It's like, how is this just every time? It just keeps coming. I think, yeah. There's something about it's usually set in England, not always, usually. And there's something about all the social rules that it's almost like a sci-fi, you know, where there are kind of like there's things in the way of people getting together, like really real social and economic and political problems for them if they hook up, or if they even express their feelings. It's almost like writing fantasy, like it's a whole other world.
There's a really interesting comment came out to me recently, was how many dukes were there in the Regency period, which the point is moot. It doesn't matter how many dukes there were, but a lot less than have been written about. But the fact too is that the Victorian era was very straight-laced and the Regency period was getting a bit looser. And so there's that slight easing of rules and regulations, usually in the patriarchal sense, not in the female sense, but that does loosen things up a little bit.
Apparently it was way looser than actually Regency novels tend to portray, because you know, Victorian came later, and has in some ways influenced, like, we look at Regency through that lens, and like women would wear like basically see-through dresses, and like they'd have their breasts out half the time, like it was proper, like, and but we've, you know, since then things have got real. So even though, okay, so yeah, women were walking around half naked, but at the same time they didn't have any political power, they couldn't get divorced, their children they were chattel, you know, they and their children belonged to their husbands, they couldn't get work, like especially if you weren't, like, if the poor could get work, but if you were middle class, there wasn't middle class, upper class, that would completely degrade you, so you would no longer be marriageable, and therefore was life worth living, I guess. Like the societal stuff was still there.
The new money, the merchant class looked interesting to us, for us coming through as like 2000s. You're thinking, oh, the merchant class, but actually they were considered much lower. So that's an interesting mix of society too, which often comes through now in more contemporary writers who are writing Regency.
And we clean it up.
Okay.
We take away the smells and the diseases.
Yeah, we do.
We don't have to deal with syphilis in novels.
Okay, so we're going to move away from Regency. When we're talking about contemporary, now I thought it was an interesting conversation when you go and look at the definition of contemporary novels or the contemporary period, you will see comments that say take it back to World War II. But I don't know about you guys, but I would consider World War II actually historical, because we are so far removed from what society was like back then for that to be, we understand it. So how do you know, Steph, you are definitely writing contemporary, and I think all three of you are writing contemporary. How do you feel, how far back do you think contemporary goes?
I think pre-cell
wartime, it's definitely
historical.
Yeah, historical. But yeah, that I think is an individual actual interpretation of the word historical. It is strange that if you say you're writing historical, people will assume what era. So I would say, for example, Soraya Lane, who's been writing, she's writing wartime. So she would say, I'm a historical writer, but she's also writes contemporary. So she would call it historical, but then she would explain the era. So I'm a historical writer and I write about wartime romance, for example.
I mean, I think it's to do with how much it affects the story, right? Like if it feels like you're writing in another world, then it's historical as far as I'm concerned. And depending on your story, like that could, like if you've got quite a small setting where people are not traveling, they're not having to communicate using technology, it might not seem very foreign if it's 20 years ago. But if you are traveling and using technology, 20 years ago is another world, right? Like pre-Facebook, pre-cell phones, pre-social media, those things, they change the way your characters communicate. You can't have someone not be able to find someone unless someone's broken their cell phone now.
Yeah, I think technology is a big thing.
Okay, cool. Because I'm into that as well with understanding and writing the technology and making sure that you understand how that interacts with characters and all that sort of thing. Right. So now that we've got a sense of where we're all sitting and what you're all writing, one of the questions that I have had, I'm curious to find out what drove you to write these genres and what drove you to pursue the publication routes that you have. You might need to explain what publication route you've chosen, but let's go for it. Alexa, what about you?
Cool. I actually got into romance with a kind of commercial mindset at first. So that was what I was telling myself back about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And I decided that the easiest way to get published was to write Mills and Boon. So I went on their website, went through all their guidelines and found the category that I thought I could best write to and went, right, that's what I'm going to do. But the more I've written romance, the more I think I was actually just looking for a reason to write it, because everything I've ever written has had a romantic thread in it. But they were all over the place, dystopians, paranormals, all kinds of bits and pieces. So I think it's really something that I love doing, but it kind of come into it in a weird way. And I do this self-publishing route. I had, I think it was 2018, I decided was the year of querying. And if that didn't go anywhere, then 2019 was the year of self-publishing. So I sent out a whole bunch of query letters in 2018, and I had a few kind of revise and resubmit requests come through, but I took so long to make the changes that I kind of figured they'd probably forgotten about me anyway. So I just decided in the end that I'd go with it myself. I saw a talk by Bella Andre at the RWNZ conference, and that was really motivational. So yeah, I decided to go with that.
Steph, what about you? Where are you going and why did you start this path?
So when my youngest went to school, I started going to the library for myself, which was like a major gift to myself. I'm a voracious reader, and I always have been. And I've been reading romance since I picked up my sister's Sweet Valley High books. And my dad I always thought they were my mother's, but my dad had a collection of Lucy Walker's, which is an Australian writer. She writes Outback, beautiful settings. She's just amazing. And hers are in the, I would say, 1920s, set then. And so I was always reading romance in the background. So when I came back to reading for myself after the kids I had more time on my hands, I started reading all sorts of things. And my reading got narrower and narrower and narrower until I got back to romance, and I thought that is what I love. There's so much happening in the world that is rough and a little bit hard to see on TV that I don't want to be reading that on my page. And that's just a personal preference. So whenever I come into a story, there can be there can be all sorts of things happening. I love Nalini Singh, for example. I love her contemporary romances, and they've got all sorts of background and rough bits and pieces happening in the background, or what's happened in that character's past. But I know she's going to present me with a happy ever after or a happy for now, and that's what gets me. So after reading these, I hadn't read Nalini Singh at this point, but in about 2017, I read a couple of Catherine Robertsons. I just came across them by accident. She's a New Zealand writer who writes a lot of, chick lit, women's fiction. It's not, it's deeper than chick lit in a way. It's not aiming towards the funny. It's aiming toward, I don't know what you call it, contemporary New Zealand writing, but it always has a romantic thread. And so I read a couple of hers, and then I came across a woman called Michelle Holman, and she wrote chick lit, very funny, very witty, and it was all set in New Zealand. And my eyes just about popped out of my head. I was thinking, how can this be? It's amazing writing, and it's all set in New Zealand. And could I do that? I'd always been a lyricist. I've always written songs, poems for songs, to go in the band and stuff like that. So to me, it was just like a extension of that. I'm writing a song, but it's a really long one. So there's a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's telling a story. So I read a couple of books that I'd have to say, and this is not from New Zealand writers, that I thought, that's unusual that got published, and not in a rude way, but just, how was that published? And then I thought, could I do this? And I wanted to prove to myself whether I could or couldn't. So I wrote my first book, and then I joined RWNZ, Romance Writers of New Zealand, because that seemed to be what I was going to write. And I started becoming a competition junkie, and the people who know me know that I just can't stop, because I realized that I keep doing this because I was learning, and a learning curve that went straight up, and it was incredible, and that is because of these competitions. So if you're just starting out and wondering, am I any good? Can I do this? This is what I love to do. I'm loving it. So write what you love, and try some competitions and see how it goes, because that gave me the confidence to say, and I was the same as Alexa, I was getting a lot of callbacks and saying, oh, we'd like to read this full manuscript, thank you. Oh, we love this. Could you change A, B, and C? Oh, could you shorten this by 10,000 words, which is my thing. The other thing that I kept getting over and over again, and this was a real soul searcher, could you change this Otago surfer, for example, into a Hawaiian surfer so that we can sell this to the American market? Because this is such a New Zealand story. If you could just make it an American story, it would be easier to promote that way. And that gave me a lot of soul searching, because to me, what I love to write is New Zealand. And what I wanted to publish was New Zealand. And that was one of my strongest emotive points. And so eventually I stopped changing that manuscript and pulled back and said, hang on a minute, no, I'm going back to this version, and I'm going to publish it myself. So I'll be self-publishing next year. So all I've published at the moment are short stories and anthologies, but I'm on my way. So thank you.
Amy, what about you? Because I know you have an assorted history.
Sorted? Oh my gosh, now you're overselling it. People will be disappointed. I guess I started taking my writing really seriously in 2012, which was a stupid time to do that. So I was pregnant, I had a 1-year-old, and we moved to Paris, and I didn't speak any French. So there were really a lot of other things I should have been doing, but learning French. But for some reason, that sort of, I don't know, being away from family and friends, no one knew me. I guess there was some liberty in that to kind of be a person I hadn't been before. And so I did. I wrote, and I joined writers groups, and I wrote all sorts of things. And romance had always been my thing, Jane Austen, and then later Marian Keyes. And I really liked the sort of romantic comedy. I wanted a happy ending. Rom-com doesn't always promise that. I can probably talk to the whole difference between women's fiction and chick lit if you like, but the thing I like about Marian Keyes books is that while they're very, very funny and they have a happy ending and there is a through line of a romance, there's always other serious subject matter. There are moments that are just plain philosophical. It's a real insight into the human condition at times. They don't shy away from gritty issues, and they don't deal with them. They don't reduce them to backstory either. Sometimes I struggle with that in romance novels, where there's this incredibly complex and difficult trauma in the past, and it sort of, it can almost be trivialized. But so I really enjoy the ones where it's not, I guess. Well, you don't have to have a huge amount of trauma, actually. A little bit can go a long way. So 2012, was actually about the time that self-publishing really took off. And that was when I was submitting, I guess, I'd already written a couple of books at that point. I hadn't really had any luck submitting them. And I started really looking into the different submissions and different routes. And I was pretty determined to go traditional, like really, really seriously determined to go traditional. And we lived in France for 3 years. And I was writing and submitting that whole time. I think I'd written about 8 books when we moved back. So I think it was 2 a year while we were there. One of those I wrote in 3 weeks. Like it sort of fell out of me. And there was a day where I wrote 12,000 words. That was pretty nuts. But there were other factors that meant that children were being cared for by other people, and thanks to French socialism and things. So, yeah, that helped. And I was in the same time zone with a lot of like UK literary agents and publishers and people talking books and people talking self-publishing. I was witnessing all this stuff, but I was still very fixed. I'm going to go trad. We moved back. And within a few months, I actually got a literary agent. It was probably a little bit later than that, actually. So I'm getting the timeline mixed up. I got a mentorship with the New Zealand Society of Authors, which was cool, or a manuscript thing, won a scholarship-y thing, which was quite affirming. But that wasn't the book that got the literary agent. And like, I got a proper one, like in New York and all, and I was like, whoa, I made it. Dear reader, I had not. The process with her was brilliant. It was incredible. We worked together for a year, back and forth, and I made the book so much better. But it was women's fiction to begin with, and by the time we were done, it was romance, and she didn't represent romance. So it was a much stronger book. Like the pace was good, the voice was better. Like we solved a whole lot of problems, but in the meantime, I turned it into a romance novel, and she didn't represent romance. So we parted ways amicably, and I was devastated. I thought I'd made it. I had not. Back to square one, back to submitting to randoms on the internet. I mean, reputable literary agents, but randoms. And then I went back teaching full time. And I didn't stop writing. I kept doing it, but I guess I was just like quite disillusioned. And I gave my book to a writer friend of mine who I really trust. She's quite a renowned New Zealand author. She doesn't write romance, but she's written pretty much every other genre. Tanya Roxburgh. And I've known her since I was a child, and she read it, and she was like, aside from the fact that she was like, holy cow, that is some very hot sex, and I've known you since you were 3 years old, and that's weird. But other than that, she was like, this is fantastic. It should be published. And she like tweeted about it and tweeted her literary agent and another one that she'd worked with in the past, who were both in the States. And it didn't fit for either of them. So I went through the submission process. All this time I was kind of on and off submitting, I guess, to literary agents, to other things. Mine don't really fit the Mills and Boon kind of parameters. My heroes are not alpha enough. They're not very alpha. I wander a little, I guess. But I tried them anyway. And then, Tanya's praise, I guess, gave me I really had to think about why I wanted to go traditional. Like, people were doing really, really well with self-publishing. And, I really had to think about what it was. What was I waiting for? And I guess what I realized I wanted was to know, which of course is impossible, but to be sure, as sure as I could be, that I wouldn't regret it, that I wouldn't be embarrassed of this thing I'd put out into the world. I'm a high school English teacher. I have, I guess, some of my ego wrapped up in my ability to discern good writing from bad writing. It's my job. I hate literary snobbery, but I participate in it a little bit. I mean, I genuinely do think there is a difference between good and bad writing. So it's not all literary snobbery. Some of it is discernment. And yeah, I didn't want to be ashamed of something. I didn't want to regret it. I wanted someone to tell me it's actually ready. And I think Tanya's very public feedback, adding multiple literary agents she'd worked with in the past, and her current one was sort of that for me. So then it was just before Romance Writers Conference. At that conference, I pitched to a couple of agents. They all requested everything, but I suspect they did that quite broadly, and that didn't happen. And in my head, that was my last shot at traditional publishing. And then I have put out 3 books this year. So.
And the covers on those books look amazing.
Do you know what I just realized? I don't have any more paper copies of this. I only have this one, which is I've sold all of them. Clearly, I'm not keeping track. I'm going to have to order some more. But I didn't buy that many, but I actually can't remember how many I bought. But I was like, yeah, I was trying to find one so that I had one to hold up for this. And I was like, oh, crap. It's a good problem to have. But
so, what projects are you working on now? What's got your engines going that you want to share with us? What are you working on now? Amy, might as well start with you. We'll go the other way for a change across the screen.
So that's the first book in the series, or that's the proof copy of it. So What's French for Oops? Jean's a Kiwi nanny in Paris, which wasn't the plan. She doesn't speak any French. She's allergic to croissants. And her boss is really hot and uptight. And yeah, they fall in love eventually. The sequel to that is What's Dutch for Damn? Jean's friend and Jean's other friend have a fling, and then they become friends, which complicates matters, and they don't live in the same city. So that's that. And the third one is what I am currently working on, which is What's Irish for Encore? A colleague of Kate, who is the heroine of book 2, goes to confession because she's feeling guilty because she did some silly stuff. And after she confesses, she recognizes the priest who was her first love. So that's the kind of starting of that. That's what I'm editing at the moment. Which is why I'm NaNoWriMo adjacent. I'm right in the middle of something that's more important than the next thing.
You're going Rebel Nano. Great. I love it. Love to hear it. Cool. Steph, what about you? What are you currently working on?
So I've got my first 3 books are called the Otago series, or Otako, and that's Mako Bay is finished, and Ruby Island is the second book in that series. That's also complete, and I'm currently working on the 3rd book, which is Lake Tiamana or Diamond Lake, and they're set in Otago, Wanaka, Dunedin. So and there are 2 brothers in the first 2 books, and then a cousin, a close cousin in the 3rd book. That's a series of 3. So I'm working on that. But in the meantime, whenever I have a short story idea, I link it to those books. So there are short stories out already on my website and stuff that are connected to those people, background stories, or what Diana I always get her name wrong, Galbadron calls a bulge in the story. So when you're writing, what is that? Gabaldon. Okay, I'll use that one now. Diana Gabaldon. When she discusses writing, she talks about these bulges, and I have a tendency, I write romance, but I have a tendency, my romance, not genre, as Amy was saying, my romances tend to have quite a bit of women's fiction in them, a background story, quite a bit of background story, what else is going on, who else is important in this story, because that is what life is like to me. So when I was talking about reading romances and saying, oh, is this as good as it gets? that was for me category romance. So I'm not the reader for category romance. So I'm also not the writer for category romance. So I've figured that out, and I'm working. So that's my first series. So at the moment I'm working on the third book in that, Lake Tiamana, and I'm working on some short stories, and I have about 6 other manuscripts open I'm working on those. So it's ideas and concepts. There is another book that's finished, which is in a second series called the Boutique series. There are 3 books in that series. One is finished, one is halfway through, and another one's just conceptual. So I have 2 or 3 things on the go at once. It's just the way I work. I like to skip around. So if something is a problem for me, I tend to stew on it for a while, and it does take me about a year to write a full manuscript that I'm happy to start farming out to my beta readers, alpha reader, my beta readers, my magnificent people. So to say that I'm working on one thing is not honest, and yet there is one definite project that needs to be finished next. So let's hope it is finished next.
Cool. Yeah. What about you, Alexa? What are you currently working on?
I've also got lots of bits and pieces going on. I had a Christmas novella published yesterday, which was the last one in my first small town romance series. So that's all completely wrapped up now. I put out the first 2 books in like a spin-off series this year, and I have another 4 manuscripts in that series that are in drafts on my computer waiting for me to edit them. One of them will be going to an editor in a couple of weeks, which I'm in a bit of a dither over because I'm editing too slowly. But the others are just sitting there at the moment because I'm much better at writing first drafts than I am at editing. So I'll get around to them eventually. And I have a couple more planned in that series, but I'm actually putting those on hold for a little while because I figure with the 4 I've got, by the time I edit them, I've got enough to put out next year and probably the year after as well. So I'm going into my sports romances, which I'm publishing as just A-rivers because they're quite different to my small town romances. So I wanted to differentiate them a bit. And the first one of those was kind of a passion project that wouldn't leave me alone earlier in the year. I used to do Muay Thai, so I really loved that martial arts setting. And I just kind of sat down one night and decided that it wouldn't leave me alone, so I'd write it. And it was a lot of fun. I just poured all of the crazy into it that I try to contain a little bit in some of the other areas. And then I've written another story in that series, which is out with beta readers at the moment. I've got about half of them back, and I just started the third one, first draft, this week, which was exciting. So I have about 2,000 words of that written, and I'm hoping to finish that up in the next 2 or 3 months. But yeah, I've got the first one in that series coming out in December, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Now, there was a question that has come through. Someone was asking, do you see that the trend towards self-publishing is happening overall within the industry, or do you think it's more heavily romance in particular? What are your thoughts? Amy?
I think the trend towards self-publishing happened a while ago now. I think it worked better for some genres than others. So then people respond to that, right? So if it's working well in a genre, writers notice, publishers notice, readers even notice, and it keeps heading in that direction. It gains momentum. And other genres, some genres. So for instance, poetry, literary fiction, there's just not, I guess the reason, what you do with those books is different. With literary fiction, you want to put it on your bookshelf. Often those books are, and poetry books as well, often those books are beautiful art objects. They don't have, like romance novels, if you look at the covers all lined up, they follow very similar patterns. The same is not true of literary fiction. They often have really interesting, different covers that and if you look at like a really, like almost a modern classic, it'll have had 6 or 7 different covers in the time it's been out. And I guess there's an element of, you know, you put it on your bookshelf because it makes you look smart. And poetry books, people take them out. Like they take them to, you know, open mics and they want to share them. They read aloud. So yeah, it's a bit different. I'm not an expert on which genres are and aren't doing really well with digital, but if they are doing well with digital, then that tends to be a good place for self-pub because the costs are low. So you can publish digitally for zero money and probably do it a little bit badly, but you can publish digitally for the cost of editing and a cover and do it really well. So I guess the price point to enter into the digital market for a self-published author makes the digital market, the things that do well in the ebook market are probably the easiest places to self-publish. Yeah.
The other thing is if you are slightly out of genre, so for me it was I want to set this in New Zealand. I'm slightly out of genre that is a sure sell. So category romance is still very well traditionally published and they are hunting for writers. And they're constantly looking for writers. But if you are slightly out of the norm, right now the publishing market, they are not going to spend a whole lot of time and money on developing something that could be a really good, that could be the next best thing, the next new thing. What they're looking for is what a sure sell is the next best thing. So if you're slightly out of the regular category, if you're a romance but you've got more than two protagonists, for example, that actually sets you aside as a chick lit or a women's fiction writer, but maybe it really is a romance with just more voices in it. So you're slightly out of genre. If you were going to an agent, they would tell you, okay, if you want this to be a romance, let's take everybody but these two protagonists out. And
Uh-oh.
Oh no, she froze mid-sentence. Oh no,
I can pick that up though, because like I think one of the things too is timing. Like like romantic comedy, chick lit is having an absolute boom right now. And like the last year, everyone's been like, is this gonna last? It's like mid-90s again. Everyone loves a rom-com. But when I was traditionally, you know, when I was sending out all those letters and getting all those, please submit again with these changes, or yes, I'd like to see the whole thing, and then never hear from them again. Or, you know, when I was really submitting a lot, I was sending out essentially chick lit, and they were going, nah, chick lit's not selling. Like a lot of the reasons I got all those rejections was probably actually to do with the trends.
Yeah.
And until I sent someone something and I said, this is women's fiction, when I sent it to her, and it had a whole different structure. Like What's French for Oops is the book, and it started after they hooked up, and then it jumped back in time, and then it was like, so the whole thing was like the future and the past interwoven like that, and it was all from her perspective, and it was first person, so it was very much like women's fiction. And now it's her perspective, and it's chronological, and it's very much a romance novel, but well, it's a romantic comedy because of the other content, but yeah, it was not publishing. Like no one was doing that. That was not a genre that was doing well then. So you might have better luck going trad with it now.
All right, so we're basically saying that at the moment it's just we have to look at what the markets are doing. The markets are weird. The markets are definitely weird. I suppose an extension to some of those questions, there's been a lot of talk about the difference. You know, we're talking about chick lit, romance, women's fiction. Where is the line? Where is the line?
Line or kind of blur?
Yeah, probably is a blur. But where is it? Where is that division? Where do we
women's
really
fiction-
go?
Here's my line. How long is a piece of string? To each agent, it seems to be slightly different. There are rules of thumb, but yeah, to each agent, it seems to be slightly different. Do you think the same, Alexa? Because you've kind of jumped genres a little bit too.
I tend to think, like, I had a meeting with some other writers that probably about a year ago now, and I had this total panic because I thought I was writing romance and they had me questioning whether I was writing women's fiction. But at the end of the day, it kind of, to me, it came down to, is it just her story, or does he have a character arc too? And my heroes always have a character arc as well, so I couldn't picture taking them out of it. So that was what to me made it romance.
Yeah, I think that's quite a key defining element, because that was the point with my agent where she was like, he has a voice now, it's a romance. Like as soon as I gave him a point of view, it stopped being women's fiction. But I think there is different promises to the reader. With a romance, we have a happy ever after for these two characters that you set up right from the start, that you want them to get together. Even if you hate them or one of them at the start, you still want that person to get, you're like, yeah, but they'll get better. Like there's a right from chapter like 2 at the latest, you know what you're looking forward to, and you know that there'll be a satisfying ending. With women's fiction, and same with romantic comedy, there is no guaranteed happy ever after. There's no promised ending. There is a little bit more of a gamble in reading one of them. So if I advertise my books as rom-coms, I always add like #HEA because there are romance readers who like rom-coms, but only if they have happy ever afters. In fact, lots of romance readers like rom-coms, but are wary of books that are advertised as rom-coms because they might die at the end. Basically. Sorry, Steph. Or it might turn out they've been dead all along, I guess is the yeah, the chick lit is kind of a funny one because it gets used in lots of different, it gets used all over the show, and it also has like super sexist overtones because chick is such a way to refer to a human being. And I mean, it can be used in a really friendly context, but I think it's never, you wouldn't call someone you look up to a chick. You know, it's not something you would ever say to a like writer who you adore and like aspire to be like. You wouldn't be like, hey, that chick, man, she's awesome. Like, no, you'd say it to like your friend or your child or like a teenager. It's young and it's got connotations of kind of light, fluffy, not entirely to be taken seriously. So I mean, I use it because it's short. It's shorthand. People know what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it has a recognizable and understood concept.
Tone.
But the same can be said for women's fiction. I find that quite sexist too, because are men not allowed to read this fiction? Like, or is it not for them? Like, and a lot of the writing, like my dad read romance. Not that he told anybody back in the 70s that he was doing it, but it wasn't to him women's fiction. It was a great story. And so sometimes the categorization of things is we do it so that the reader gets, they know the ownership, the promise of what they're going to get is answered. We're promising it and we give it to them. So yes, I've called my work chick lit too, and I also disagree with the term, but I'm trying to allow people to find it if they're looking for that category. Yeah,
I think that's what's hard. Like women's fiction, it's like, am I only allowed to read stuff that's by women? Like I read all sorts. Like I read incredibly broadly, and by calling it essentially what women's fiction is, it's a woman. A woman is the main character, and it's written by a woman. That's it. That's the whole defining thing. And the fact that we have to call it women's fiction is because we have decided that the only things that are normal, like what doesn't need to be categorized, is whether man is the writer and a man is the main character, and their story is the central narrative. And generally, a straight cisgendered white man, for the most part, is the only stuff that fits without being put into a niche. Like everything else is niche. Like, no. I don't want to participate in this, but I have to sell books.
I think there's probably a little bit more of a constraining definition for women's fiction, because going through and saying that it's a, your main character is a woman and it's written by a woman, well, then my thrillers where I'm killing everyone and the assassin is like torturing you is going to be classified women's fiction, and there's no way that is women's fiction.
Probably a key thing there is you are also ticking a bunch of boxes for thriller, but you can have women's fiction where the main character is an assassin. So the way that you write the story is also a part of it. I guess it's on the literary side of things.
Isn't paranormal or urban fantasy women's fiction a thing now? I'm sure there are some assassins in there.
Women's fiction
There's
is
a lot of assassins in paranormal.
It is. It's
all right, so, but what about men? I think Nicholas Sparks has done successfully well. It's writing. Maybe, maybe not.
He writes romance. He writes women's fiction, I would say.
Like the love stories. Yeah.
They're love stories, not romances, really.
I think it depends on the book.
You don't have a happy
I think it depends on the book.
If there's no happy ending, you can't call it a romance.
Because
I'll agree with that statement.
Hollywood would never call Nicholas Sparks a romance writer because that would be offensive to Nicholas Sparks, and I find that really funny because Nicholas Sparks's books that have done well and have been turned into movies are in fact love stories that are on the side of romance. So I think the books that he has written that have done best are in fact romance. And I think it's really interesting that he's considered a contemporary writer or just a he's just given the term writer, which
because he's a man, Steph.
I know, and I find that snobbery, and it's interesting. Amy, you were talking about the literary snobbery before, and I have that literary snobbery when it comes to category romance, which is ridiculous because some of it I have loved. We have a couple of writers in New Zealand and actually in Canterbury who are fantastic. J.C. Haraway, I could read any of her books any day, pick up. She's just amazing. But then her characters are believable, understandable, even if they're a billionaire tycoon who's, the story is not necessarily one that I would come across in my everyday life, but the way she writes just grabs and takes you on it. But so in a way, I have this literary snobbery as well, where I'm thinking I want my stories to be more than a romance. But sometimes as a reader, I just want the romance. So yeah. The snobbery is a little bit, I find it a bit confronting within the family and stuff too, that I'm not sure how much of that I put on myself. But
I think Alexa has a point to make. It's
an interesting concept of when are you successful?
Right, so Alexa, you had something you wanted to say?
I was just going to add to that point about I have no problem in terms of internal snobbery saying I'm a romance writer. Like 98% of what I read is romance, but I definitely get that same family thing, or like someone asks you what kind of writing you do, and you get that feeling that they're like, exercising that same kind of judgment snobbery, and they may not be. It might just be all in your head, but you kind of have that like initial, ooh, what are they thinking now?
A little tale from school about myself. When I started connecting with these wonderful women, I was kicking and screaming, and no, I am not joining romance writers because I don't write romance. I'm known amongst my writing buddies as the queen of violence. I think Steph will quite happily attest to a comment that I had given on her writing about, this is where I'll throw in an explosion. So that is me. And what was that?
One of the writers was, if this was mine, someone would be dying in this page. Around about here, you need to kill someone. And I was like, what?
Yeah, that was me. But basically, I think what it was is I had this misconception, and it really is a misconception, that romance was Mills and Boon, Harlequin. And I think the society as a whole has that misconception. Since being involved with these wonderful women and all the other romance writers that I've met, including J.C. Haraway, who does write category romance and would, she's a Mills and Boon writer herself. Since being involved, I've realized the romance is so much more than that. And that even the stuff that I was writing, so my high fantasy novel, I discovered is actually a romance. And so I was a closet romance writer. Oh my God, I'm a closet romance writer. Ha! But I think that's pretty much what we're probably facing, is when we say what you're writing and you get this misconception coming through from other people. I think it's because of that association that people have.
Yeah,
and
I
maybe
think
that's
it
why
goes back
Nicholas
quite a
Sparks
long
is in it.
way. Like, it's
Was
not,
that?
this is not a recent thing. I think it goes back a long way. I think women have been making money and running this business and writing these stories and selling them and reading them for a long time. And because it's primarily women, we've kind of said, well, it must be lesser than. If it's not particularly difficult to read, well, it mustn't be very good. And that's just wrong. Like, if it's hard to read, that means it's good. Because, I have students whose writing is really hard to read, and it's not because it's good. Like, the ones who are really easy to read are usually the ones who know what they're doing.
Okay, so let's shift a little bit of tactic. Okay, so let's shift a little bit of our tactic here, and let's we are in November, so we're in NaNoWriMo, and there are people everywhere around trying to write novels or bits and pieces. What are your routines like? What is your writing routine? How do you get your stuff on the page? Alexa, let's start with you.
I'm a totally over-organized plotter. So I have to know exactly what's going to happen in a story before I start writing it. I'm talking, I have like 10,000 word outlines. But it all starts with the character for me. Once I have the character in my head, it can all kind of go from there. But I think the most important thing for me for finishing is having a consistent routine, which probably isn't something that works for everything. But like, I'm a member of the 365 Writers Group on Facebook, and we have a spreadsheet that we all enter in and, weekly targets. So like mine is to write 5,000 words every week. And like, that just makes me write every day, because I don't have enough time ever to sit down and do that in one go. So it's just 500 or 1,000 words a day. I get up in the morning, write for an hour or so before work, and then head off. And yeah, that's basically it's a consistency thing for me.
Cool. Amy, what is your writing routine?
Mine varies quite a lot. So I teach full time. So during the school holidays, I have a pretty steady kind of, I write every chance I get. Like, productivity varies a lot, but I can kind of write anywhere, even for short periods of time. Like, I'll write at McDonald's while the kids are playing on the playground. I can write here. I can write in bed. I tend to kind of think about my writing when I'm not writing, so that makes it easier to kind of slip into it, because I'm already writing in my head before I get to the page. And I can write out, like, I'll often do that trick where you kind of journal what you want to write that day. I'll like go, okay, so where I'm up to is so and so is in this place, and we really need to get to the point where she realizes this. What could make her realize that? Maybe she could get a text and that could include a photo of this and that's in the background, or no, that's a bit too obvious. What about, and I like have this written conversation with myself. There's something about the physical writing that gets the juices flowing, I guess. So that when I'm writing a first draft, that tends to be part of it. I mean, this year has been the year that nothing happened like normal, but editing I tend to do during term time. Like, I try to write a a new draft in the school holidays and then edit it in the term, because I can dip in and out. It doesn't matter if I haven't done it every day, because I don't have to, I don't need to be as kind of in the pacing. Like, the pacing is already there. I've got the outline. I've written 15 books now, so my sense for pace is quite good. Like, that's probably one of the things that is significantly better than it was. And then the editing I can do with less regular routine. I make the use of Saturday mornings, pawn my children off on television and don't go and watch my son's soccer games. I'm a terrible mother. And yeah, I guess I'm quite good at, I call it word snatching, just making the most of times when they come up. But I did find, I think during our lockdown, which was about 10 weeks, March through end of April, March, April, tiny bit of May. So I was teaching online, which was exhausting and not particularly rewarding, but I did find I had a bit more emotional and creative energy left at the end of the day than I do when I'm teaching at school. So I actually got heaps written. Like, I think I edited one whole manuscript and drafted one whole manuscript during that time. So, and that's the one I'm editing now. So that was quite good, because the rest of the year's been completely crazy and I haven't been that productive, if I'm honest. But yeah, I do plan. I used to plan incredibly thoroughly. Now I have a little bit more faith in myself to come up with something as I'm going. So I tend to have I use that romancing the beat, and I kind of plan out the main events, but I don't force myself to fill in the gaps before I start writing. And I often go off my plan, but I come back to it at the end, I guess. Or I come up with something better. So, yeah.
I'm just going to jump in there with my... Hang on. I'll just jump in there with my recommendations too. You mentioned Romancing the Beat. I love Nail Your Story. I think it's by Monica Leonel, and Character Arcs by K.M. Whelan. Another two that I kind of like to go back to.
Cool. No problem. Steph, what about you? What's your routine like?
So when I grow up, I want to be Alexa Rivers and actually plot my books, but it's not the way I work. So I'm a pantser, and pantsing is, if you don't know what that term is, I make it up as I go along. And then this has the unfortunate response sometimes of getting to chapter 5 and going, oh no, I hate where this is going. I'm going to go back to chapter 3. Or I will skip and go, I've written up to chapter 3, and then, oh, I know the kiss scene or the central scene, or I know an argument, and I'll write that. So I skip around in my timeline, and usually when I write my central scene, or what I think of as my central scene, I've got the end. I know what happens in the end. I know how this ends. I know the best. So I will write as I read it. And so as things come to me, I will write notes to myself within my manuscript. So if it's written in black, I'm pretty happy with it. If it's in blue, I've grabbed it from somewhere else, or I need it somewhere else, so I'm going to shove it around. It's going to be moved somewhere. And if it's in red, then it's a concept, or it's a chapter idea, or a scene idea, or this is where it needs to switch to her voice. Or so that's pantsing. And that seems to be the way I work. Occasionally I will plot things out, especially if I'm having trouble. I'll go to my betas and go, who are my readers actually, and will say, hey, I'm having this real trouble with character A, B, C, D, because they're not doing E, F, G, H. And we'll kind of nut it out in a conversation. It is fantastic talking to people who know your characters as if they're real people, because you can just be balmy together and talk about all these people who don't actually exist and sort out their lives for them. But my writing routine is also pantsing, because I'm a mother of 3. I run a children's entertainment company. I teach pottery. So I've got all sorts of things on the go. And so I use writing as this is my gift to myself. It's like I use it as I would reading time. It's like the ultimate reading time where I'm allowed this gift of time. So I tend to do it. I have windows of time where I know it's available. And if I can, I use it for writing. There's a slot on a Monday afternoon after pottery. I know that I've got 2 hours there and I can sit in a cafe and write my heart out or edit somebody else's work. So I have windows of time throughout my week that I tend to use. Today I had a cancellation of a job that I was supposed to be doing this morning with a children's entertainment industry, and that was cancelled. And I thought I could write or I could go in the garden. So I actually do it for my own health benefit too. So I think it's really important to know your own stress levels, how much is too much. That's another reason why I didn't choose traditional publishing, because I realised that those deadlines could actually be the death of me. I want to write because I love it. I never want to lose the love of writing. So I've actually made a choice to do that. Now, I'm never going to be a multimillionaire because I'm putting out 4 manuscripts a year, because it's just not the way I work. So you have to make that choice for yourself. It's an individual choice. And I think it has to be to do with your mental health, your physical health, your financial health as well. Okay, of course, that's important too. But I've got other things on the go to help with that. So I'm not relying on this 100%.
Yeah, I think that's a really important, like you do, because like I love it. It's like reading, but even more fun. And like there's conversations that you have with your friends. It's like talking about celebrities, but it's better because you actually get to fix them. Celebrities, you don't get to fix them. They're just going to stay messed up. But like I have this slot every week. My daughter goes to a dance class and I have 45 minutes, and half the time I just sit in the car and write, because I'm like, going to find a cafe. That's 10 minutes less writing. And and I quite enjoy it. It's like, oh, this is nice. Other people are like waiting around bored for 45 minutes, or like walking up and down the chemist warehouse aisles going, I never have tried unsalted almonds. Today's the day. But don't. They're disgusting. But
to climb into this world, it's an amazing secret. It's like, I'm just going to open up my iPad and climb on into this world where actually she wants to kiss this guy or she wants to kiss this woman. And so you're climbing into a whole different world, and I feel like it's a secret in a way. It's like climbing into a book, but it's
brilliant.
On steroids.
Brilliant.
And it's exactly as you like it.
I have this.
So there is another question sitting here that needs to be answered before we open the floor to questions of other random questions. Is if people are wanting to get into writing romance, what advice would you give them?
Finish writing a book. Like, just write the whole damn thing. Like, actually get to the end. It might be good. It probably won't if it's your first book, but it could be fixable. But actually, once you've written the second one, you won't care so much. Like, finish one and then write another one. Like, don't try and ship that first one. Just like write a second book. Then you'll have enough objectivity to maybe make some decisions about whether or not the first one's worth pursuing. But like, just finish something would be my advice. Just whatever it takes for that to happen, which is going to be different for everybody. But finish a book.
I agree with that to a point too, and it can be, even if this is too big to chew. So finish a short story. So look at what's a 5,000 word story. What about a 10,000? What about a novella? So you can take your bite size. What are you wanting to write? I think write what you love, and when you're starting, write what you know, because you do end up doing a lot of research. But it is incredible, the books that I've written that have pottery in it. It's everybody's favorite. But it's because I know my stuff. Like, if I'm teaching pottery, I know glazes, etc. So when you put that in a character, it becomes, so write what you know, write what you love. And yes, get the end in there, but you can choose the size of the end. It can be 100,000 word book. a big one, or you could go, 50,000 K, or you could go short stories first. Just give yourself that end, so you've got a completion there, and it's like a pat on the back each time.
I often compare it to doing a bridge from standing, because there's a point where you have to fall, and you have to know that you can land it in order to do it. So if you want to write books, first you have to write a book. Then you can write a book, and then you can do it. Then you'll always be able to do it because you've done it, and you can fall because you've landed it before. You'll land it again.
Yeah, finishing is a big thing. Once you finish, you've proved to yourself that you can do it. And the more you finish, the more you prove to yourself that you can keep being trusted to finish. I also want to reiterate that writing what you know. And if you're new coming to romance, or if you want to write romance and you haven't read a lot of it, I think it is really helpful to read a few just to get a feel for it. And also, it does make it more authentic if you write about things that you have experience in. Like I have a scientist heroine, and a lot of people have commented that those scenes seem really authentic, and that's because I have a master's degree in chemistry. So, I know the lab scenes, I know what I'm doing there. Or like the MMA romances I'm writing now, I've been in a gym for a few years. I've competed. I know how that world works, and it really comes across on the page.
Yeah, half of my reviews mention the fact that it's a really authentic telling of Paris. They're like, well, yeah, I lived there for 3 years. Like, it shows. And I'm worried because the next book is set in Ireland, where I've never been. Maybe I shouldn't tell people that, but I have to fake it. I do have an Irish colleague who's going to read it for me as one of my alpha readers and make sure it comes across as real. But yeah, I'm like, this. It's kind of hard to fake the truth. Judy, do you realize you're muted?
I think that's an important point too about the about if you're not 100% sure, running it past somebody who is sure. So running it past 2 or 3 different people. I think that whatever we can put in our writing and whatever diversity we're putting in our writing, any diversity is fantastic, but do use beta readers or sensitivity readers, or take it to. So for me, I took my first novel to a surfer and said, can you just check this terminology? And she picked up a couple of things. I'm a snowboarder, and I've tried surfing, but I'm not a great surfer. So I had my terminology around in snowboarding terms, and she said, just, that was really important for me. The instant a surfer read it, they would go, what? That's not Kiwi slang for a leg rope. It's called an ankle strap, or whatever. Other way around. Leg rope and surfing, ankle strap is for snowboarding.
Okay, so we are getting some questions through, which is quite awesome. So we're going to try to keep our answers a bit shorter this time around. This could be entertaining because we all love to hear ourselves talk, so this could be fun. All right, so emotionally draining. Writing is so incredibly emotionally draining. How do you refill the well?
I actually recently put a bit of a routine for this. You might be picking up I'm very routine oriented, but I put together this point scoring system because I was finding I was getting a little bit drained. So I basically wrote a list of things that I really enjoy and that make me feel better, like yoga, taking the dog for a walk, going to the beach, and I need to get 5 points a week. So they've each got a different point value, and I just tick off to make sure I get enough done over the week that I know I'll be feeling all right at the end of it.
I have found doing other creative things helpful, like things that are not around words. I guess my whole life is words because I'm a high school English teacher and I write. And I read for fun. So slightly obsessed with words. But if I paint or draw or play the saxophone or plant something or cook something, or other things that are kind of artsy, creative adjacent things, then small bites, write a poem instead, write a haiku. It's always good to have one of them up your pocket in case you get thrown in front of an open mic. Just do something creative. It doesn't always have to be the book. And I find those things help.
So I do what Alexa does, but without bullet points. And I really do want to be Alexa when I grow up. I think she's got it down pat. So yes, I agree with the what fills my tank. So if you're realizing that writing is actually emptying your tank, then actually for me, that's my self-help health thing coming through, is where I'm going, well, that's not what I'm doing it for. I'm doing it for me. So I'm doing too much. So like the haiku situation, I do have 6 things on the go, because if one is burning me out, I might not actually be the writing itself. It might actually just be that story at the moment. Some of them are quite emotionally in depth, and you actually lose a bit of yourself each time you're writing. You need to recharge that. So yeah, walking on the beach with the dog. I don't have a dog. I run my boys instead. But doing some yoga or gardening. This morning I did gardening, but I'm actually eager now, having had that break. I'm really eager. I'm thinking, oh, there's a space tonight when the kids are going to be watching a movie where I'm going to be able to edit that chapter. So I'm getting excited about it, because it's like I've left it as a carrot dangling in my day.
Cool. I like that. Okay. I need the dog, because I don't have a dog, just so I can go and walk the dog. That'd be awesome. Handling of literary criticism. Somebody was asking, how do you handle criticism?
Do you mean like reviews?
Why don't we say reviews as well as feedback? Because you're going to get both, especially at the level you guys are at. You're going to have both reviews and feedback.
So with reviews, maybe I should start with feedback. So I was a part of a feedback group in Paris, and it was amazing. It was a drop-in group. Any random show up, €5 on the door, and it was at Shakespeare and Company bookshop. So, it was a whole experience, and all sorts of random people would show up from all over the world. And some of their feedback would be awesome, and some of their feedback was so freaking wrong. And like, you're just sitting there going, no, don't do that to your poem. That is not a good idea. And actually that was really good, because it made me go, not all feedback is good. Like I should, trust my instinct to a degree. The other thing I noticed, sometimes you'd write something and someone would love it and someone would hate it. And the more experienced writers there were like, if someone loves it and someone else hates it, keep it. It's if people are apathetic, if they're like, then you've got a problem. And like, to a degree, it does kind of matter who the feedback's coming from. I'm in a writer's group now, and there's one person there who just doesn't get me. He just doesn't like he's pretty good feedback for my poetry, but even then I feel like we're just on different wavelengths, and I just don't particularly care what he thinks of my writing, because he just doesn't seem to get it. He's also not my target audience. I'm like, you're really not in the demographic that's buying my book, and a bunch of people are buying my book. So, oh well. And then I guess when it's a review, it's a little bit different, because it's like, okay, you already bought this and it's going up on Amazon, and lots of other people are going to read this in part of their decision making. So some reviews you're like, well, you mean that in a bad way, but I think it might sell my books. Like one of my reviews is like, it was a lot hotter than I was expecting. I'm like, some people are going to be like, hello, thank you. And a couple of them I was like, oh, I don't really feel like that's justified. Like one of them says like something like, it would have been great to have like really enthusiastic and obvious consent throughout. And I was like, she basically bullies them into doing it the first time. Well, not quite, but like, I was like, maybe that's what she meant. But I was like, oh, I think probably she's just listened to a podcast on this topic. And I've like looked at it again. I'm like, consent is so obvious in this, but I think she's, there's other voices in your readers' heads. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to leave it. I've checked. I don't think there's anything wrong there. There's definitely it's not like dubious consent. It's not that at all. It's very consensual. But I guess this particular reader had just heard a conversation about this topic. And so she was reading my book at the same time. And that was where her kind of mind was. I try not to hold it too, if another reader had the same feedback, then I'd be like, okay, maybe I actually need to look at rewriting that. But if it's just one voice, I try not to hold it too tightly. And I have to say that gets easier the more you write. So if you've written one book or one short story or only a couple of things and you get harsh criticism, it can feel like this little thing that you've made is bad, and it might be. Therefore, I'm a bad writer. If I've written lots of things and this one thing I've made is bad, it really has very little bearing on whether or not I'm a good writer, because it's just one of the things. So yeah, that helps.
Alexa, have you had conflicting feedback on the same story, or do you tend to have one story that's well received and then maybe another one that isn't as well received? Do you sometimes get conflicting on
I missed that last bit. I think you froze up a little bit.
She was asking if you have conflicting information or conflicting on the same bit of story, or is it extremes or?
No, usually I think it's reasonably consistent, and sometimes it's just that some people like something and some people don't. Like my scientist heroine, there were a few people in that book that didn't like her very much, didn't find her very likable, but there were others that thought it was great to read one with a really competent heroine who knew what she wanted and how to go and get it. And so that's, people liking it and not liking it, but it's for the same reason. It's not kind of conflicting. I guess it's like Amy said, it's that love it or hate it kind of thing. But yeah, I have to admit, working through criticisms are constantly a work in process for me. I'm not very good at the face-to-face aspect, which is why the beta readers that I just deal with through my email are good, or editors. And the beta readers, there's always one or two I can count on to just come back and be really, really nice, which kind of makes it easier to deal with the other ones. And usually I need a day or so of separation, especially after I get something back from an editor. I have a couple of really lovely editors I work with, and one, she'll often do editorial assessments for me, which is basically a 4-page letter telling me how to fix my story, which is it's always really thoughtful and really helpful and makes it such a better story. But I have to go away and kind of like roll on the floor and process it a little bit, and then come back a few days later when my head's on straight and I can see that it's not like it's intended to be helpful, and go with it from there. I need a bit of like processing and separation time.
I'm very similar.
Yeah, but the thing I find hard to take in reviews is when you get ones that are right. Like I recently rewrote a bit of, I have a novella. It was the very first thing I put out. It was for newsletter subscribers. And I had a bit of feedback that there was a couple of scenes when the hero was just a wee bit callous and a wee bit too mean. And I went, he's a grumpy hero. So I kind of was in denial for a while, but I went back recently and was like, yeah, that was a bit over the top. So I toned it down a bit because I kind of thought those reviews were onto something. But the ones where they just didn't like something because they didn't like it and it's a difference of opinion, it doesn't really worry me.
I definitely have that same experience with like, it hurts. Even when especially when it's like, okay, this is a good reader. They are my target audience. They love my work. They get it. This is the person whose judgment matters and they have found flaws. Like I know before I open it, I'm like, this is going to feel like a kick in the gut. And in a couple of days, I will have the objectivity. I can see my daughter out the corner. Just 10 more minutes, okay? I know that it's going to hurt for a few days, and I know I need to not touch it because I will like burn it. But but after that, I can be objective. And it gets easier with time. And you learn your process. Like everyone will have a slightly different timeline there. Maybe the response doesn't vary that much, actually, but yeah.
I think your daughter is really, really wanting attention. Hi. Okay, so last question from the group that's come through that we see. Before I go into a lightning round, this is going to be fun with lightning round. How do you come up with the titles for your books?
That's so hard. I put out 3 books before I realized I really had the wrong titles and I had to retitle them. And I only figured that out because I had someone come to me who I respected and who I knew what they were doing and say, this doesn't sound like small town romance. I don't know what it sounds like, but it doesn't sound like small town romance. So I do a lot of research on what other titles in I go out there on Amazon basically and stalk other books like mine and what kind of titles they have. And the thing for me is that they need to be quite emotive. And I have a general link, like I like them to be 3 or 4 words. I don't know why, that just is what works for me. But usually I end up brainstorming like 30 or 40 and just kind of like slowly crossing them out one by one until I have whatever's left.
Steph, what about you?
Mine was it's not as organised as Alexis. I know you're going to be very surprised about that, but I'm quite emotive about my
Oh no, we're losing her again. You're going to have to say that again.
These first 3 are really easy because they're just places, but that can mean anything. So, to those who know Te Reo Māori, mako is a shark, and so that could be a thriller, actually. So you have to be careful, I think, what your title is in relation to what your visuals are. What are you telling the reader that they're going to get in this book? So your title may be a place name, which could be a thriller, a historical, so they're going to get their cues not only from the name but also from the book cover, which so working with Amy, actually, working and going through, and I know Alexa's been doing it too, when you are stalking other writers and their books and wondering, why is this selling so well when it's a relatively unknown writer? What's selling about it? What are the trends of what's selling? Some of it is the titleage, some of it's actually the font, what the title is written in. Some of it is the pictures, and Alexa's got beautiful covers, and so's Amy's work. It's just amazing. So you know that they've done their research and had a look. But yeah, I love the titles of a weekend. But you've got some beautiful covers too.
Yeah, Amy, yeah, you do have some very nice covers, and your titles, particularly for the first series that you're working with, it, What's It for French, it gives that, I don't know about anybody else, but it gives that comedy element to it.
I went with the semi-naked man on the cover thing, which signals clear sexy romance, so that's promised to the reader. What's French for Oops? I came up with that title before I wrote the book, and it was for like a cover design 100 days project thing I was doing. You can Google if you want to know what that is, but it sort of came out of this idea of living in Paris, which is this place that everyone seems to want to go and has idealized, but not liking it or finding it hard. And I came up with it really early, and I went away from it, like with different iterations of this book and working with an editor and working with an agent. We weren't going to call it that. And then when I took it back as my own and was like, okay, I'm going to self-publish this. This is just going to be up to me now. I just wanted to go back to that title. And I'd actually had quite a bit of positive feedback from people outside of the book industry about that title. But in the book industry, they seem to want something else. But I think there are some things that are very common things that agents and editors do as soon as they get a hold of a new book. One of them is cut 10,000 words. And if you first talk to an editor and then talk to an agent, that's 20,000 words you're going to get told to cut, by the way. They're not going to care about the fact that you just cut 10,000 words for that editor. They're going to ask you to do it again. So I cut 20,000 words off this before I got, that was the first thing I had to do before. It was hard. But, and the title is another thing. It's like, that's how they put their stamp on it. Anyway, I went back to What's French for Oops, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to follow that pattern for the series. So in some ways they're easy, but I still, I have this rule. It's what's language for something related to the characters, the conflict, whatever. So the next one's What's Irish for Encore, and it's a second chance romance, right? Like they were together as teenagers, and then so it's encore and encore. And she's also an actress, so it works on that level too. The new one, which is this one, which is the Persuasion Retelling, that title I actually flogged from Persuasion, and it's 3 words from the letter. So the end of Persuasion, the hero writes her a letter, like in the book, he writes a letter to her, and he's overhearing a conversation she's having with someone else about whether or not men and women can be faithful to one another when they are separated, like when they are no longer together, whether or not love can last. And he says that he must speak to her by such means as are within my reach. And there are lots of other lines in that letter that I really, really liked. That letter is just one of the best letters in literature, I think, and it's certainly one of the best love letters. And every single other line from that letter that I was like, oh, that has been done. Like, I was searching on Amazon to see if I could use them, and it was just like one after another had been done, and they're mostly persuasion retellings, or sequels, or fan fiction things to do with persuasion. And so I was like, well, I need to find one that hasn't been done. Yeah. So I went with Within My Reach. And it's quite nice because they're kind of, the two characters are they're in each other's orbit for a period of time, and they can't really talk to each other. And so that kind of like, you're within my reach, that sort of so close but so far. I thought summed it up. Part of me is still like, I don't think it says that to everyone else, but it says that to me. So maybe it'll end up getting changed one day. I don't know.
Cool. I hope not. I honestly hope not. I think the title's great, especially the way you just described it. All right, lightning round. Here we go. You ready? You guys ready? Okay. Coffee, tea, or wine?
Wine.
Definitely tea. Tea.
Oh, we had tea and wine. Oh.
I mean, coffee,
okay.
coffee, wine. But yeah.
All right. Cake or ice cream?
Cake.
Ice cream.
I don't know. I'm a savory person. If cheese and crackers was the third option, I'd be going with that.
Okay, here we go. You ready? Chocolate or potato chips?
Potato chips.
Chocolate beats everything.
Okay. And one last. Here we go. Favorite author?
Jane Austen.
Oh, I didn't hear any of those. You're going to have to say them again.
Who's your favorite author, Amy?
Jane Austen.
I'd have to agree with that.
So
I don't
Jane
actually know if
Austen,
I can name one.
And you can't name one, Alexa. Oh, no.
I like too many.
The only reason I choose Jane Austen above all the others that I love is because those are the ones that I've read over and over and over. Like, the other ones that I love, I might have read twice.
Oh, I'm just looking at this random comment, by the way, that's come through in the chat. Chocolate covered potato chips.
They do exist.
That is a thing.
Oh, yuck. That sounds, ugh. No,
So
thank you. I think I'll pass on that.
One of the perks of living in New Zealand has to be that we are seen as like this little practice place. So when food companies are like, we need a society to like test this new weird flavor of Coca-Cola on, they're like, well, New Zealand's kind of like America, similar something, not sure what. We'll just try it there. So we get all these really random foods that don't last, they run them for like 6 months and then they disappear.
I was at the supermarket the other day and I saw mint chocolate covered popcorn, like the salted caramel popcorn, but mint chocolate. It was green and brown. It was not a good look.
I like mint chocolate, but that sounds wrong.
That sounds very wrong. Okay. There was one last. Somebody else reminded me. Thank you, Ian, my little cohort. Here we go. Last one. Paperback or ebook?
Paperback. You can't go past the paperback.
Ebook.
Yeah. I read more ebooks than paperback. You can have them in your pocket all the time.
Yeah. I read both, but
I work so much online with the writing that reading, if I've got a paperback, it's just blissful. It's so blissful. So yeah, it's a bit of a treat, I have to say. Yeah,
I do flick between the two pretty regularly, but I always have an ebook on the go because then I've always got a book in my pocket.
Yeah, I often
Yeah.
order paperbacks of my total favorites. Like, you know, if I think I'm going to reread you several times, you can be ordered as a paperback.
Yeah.
Oh. I'm just
But
so
I'm
old
cheap.
school. I don't have a Kindle, so I'm that old school.
So that's the difference. When you've got a Kindle, it's like reading paper. It doesn't hurt your eyes.
No, I don't want one. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
You're allowed.
Okay.
We give you permission.
Okay, last question, I think, ladies. What is it you would like us to know about whatever projects you have? Here's your chance. Tell us where we can find you, get more information about your writing. Alexa, you go first.
I have a website. It's just alexarivers.com, and I also just set up an Instagram for my new pen name, which I think is just A Rivers Author at Instagram, which I'm trying to slowly put some stuff up on. My other Instagram account, I've been terrible at putting content on, but I'm trying to be better with this one.
Steph, where can we find you? What can we do there?
I'm on stephanie-ruth.com, and then from there you can find me on Facebook or Twitter. And I'm trying to learn Instagram. Actually, Instagram is a bit of a bugbear for me at the moment, but I am on there at Stephanie. I think it's Ruth Writes, Ruth_Writes_NZ, which is the same as my Twitter handle, but I think it's a tricky, I don't know why it is.
Okay, Amy, where can we find more about your stuff?
amyblythe.com is probably your first port of call, but I'm on Instagram. I think I've got it down now. Follow all the writers who write books that look like yours, and then they'll follow you, and then you can find out who's following them, and then they'll follow you if you follow them. Pretty much people follow back on Instagram most of the time.
That's what I'm working on.
You don't sort of have the same with Twitter. You had a ceiling, like it won't let you have any more follows, like it won't let you follow too many more people than you have following you. But Instagram, like there might be a daily limit of how many people you can follow, but I don't think there is a, like it doesn't stick, is what I found so far. I've gone through some following rampages. And there are some cool apps that help you make images with your book covers that you can do on your phone that I've sort of got my head around now. So I'm on Instagram quite a lot. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time on there, but I post on there every day. Twitter is where I kind of hang out, but I do have a Facebook page as well and a website. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amy was Blythe is my handle on all of those. Amy was Blythe because I thought it was funny. I used to be happy. Then the world went kind of crazy.
The world is still crazy.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Very, very
it
crazy.
is still very crazy.
Is there an election result yet?
Shh. Not going there. Do not go there.
Sorry.
Okay. I would like to say thank you very much to all three of you for actually taking the time out of your weekend and taking your time out of your writing schedules and other bits and pieces to share with us your experiences with writing and writing romance in particular. I don't know about you guys, but or anyone else who's watching this, but I know I've learned a few things, so thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been good.
All right, so next week we are doing this again, but we're doing it with a whole different set of authors. At the moment, we have Gillian St. Kevin, who is going to be talking to us about LGBT romance. So that, and it is a different aspect of romance, but you're dealing with a whole different kettle of fish when you start going into the male and female type relationships. Maybe we should have Amy back. I don't know. Maybe. Okay. I just had also a little reminder as well about Ask the Editor. So Oklahoma Elsewhere has been hosting next week. It's for those of us in New Zealand, it's on Monday at, somebody help me out here, please. I can't remember exactly when. I think it's Monday, 2:00 in the afternoon for, yep, I've just looked at my calendar. It's Monday, 2:00 on New Zealand time. So it will be Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time for Oklahoma. Yes, I'm looking at my calendar. This is how I can figure out these time zone things.
It's really impressive. It's very impressive time zone math in your head.
Yeah, and I've also got a little helper B telling me it's actually at 8 p.m. Eastern time as well. Thank you, helper B.
You need the clocks on the wall with like New York time, Central Standard Time, California time, New Zealand time.
And Australia, because we also have Australia in amongst this mess as well. So yeah, so there's a few different time zones around, but do check that out. That's going to be Ask the Editor, and we're going to be talking about things like how to write fast, but avoiding the editing hell later. Meanwhile, I think that's it. I'm going to say bye and call it a day. Bye.